Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to this panel. I hope you're going to enjoy the next little bit with us as we talk about technology and creating an engaged culture. What I would like to do now is ask our panel to introduce themselves and to sort of get us started talking about this topic. I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves and then share 2 or 3 specific things that you've seen in your company that you think are really great about using technology to build an engaged culture. So we'll start.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Joris. I work at a company called Grovo. It's a fast-growing tech company. Before this, I worked at Squarespace, another fast-growing tech company. Before that, at Lassie, another fast-growing tech company. So I've been in tech, leading the people function for a very long period of time. Technology with building an engaged culture for me is important because what really great companies tend to do is they make their company feel smaller than what it really is. If you think, for example, about Google, it's 60,000 plus people right now. One thing Google did very well is they always made their organization feel smaller than what it really was. And because people are wired to want to feel connected to a company, and smaller companies, generally speaking, have that, and that's why smaller companies, generally speaking, are very engaged. People want to be in the known, people want to be heard, people want to feel loved, people want to continue to develop. And as your organization scales and becomes bigger, that's where technology can really be helpful, right? Like if you want to be heard, survey tools are great, like Culture Amp or Glint. We were speaking about that before. If you want to be in the know, like a company wiki, like a Confluence is great, or tools like BetterWorks are great. So there's different technologies that can be used to make your organization feel smaller, and I think that's the trick. And that's predominantly what I am working on as a company heading up the people function.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
agree. I'm Kirsten Davidson, head of employer brand at Glassdoor. Previous to Glassdoor, I worked at Visa, eBay, where I had similar roles. In terms of technology, I really think, especially at Glassdoor, it's a very relational company. Look at all the transparency that's out there. You have to make sure what you're saying inside is what you're saying outside. I don't think that much has changed over the last 50 years of what's important to people out of their careers and out of their relationships at work. But how we do it has changed. And so I think primarily technology, when it serves to deepen the relationships and drive communication, is really key, right? You need to be able to be available. You need to be able to express what you need to express, get done what you need to get done, and regardless of where you are, we live in a busy world, and so where we can make communication more efficient, easier, I think that's where you can really drive success with technology.
Fantastic.
My name is Ryan Wines. I have a company based in Portland, Oregon. It's a creative agency. We put music in television commercials, movies, films, all kind of brand and business endeavors that need music with picture. And I'd say technology for us, I think I want it to be about connectivity and connectiveness and keeping people together. But I find there's some challenges in that we lean more, I think, on our rhythms and our human systems to accomplish a lot of that togetherness. We're a lot smaller than some of these other companies. We have about 40 people. But we do use technology with the primary purpose to make people's lives easier internally, our people. And that's a real high value statement for our teams. When they know we're spending time and investment on technology and we're rolling out new systems that are sometimes hard to transition to, as long as they know it's going to ultimately make their lives easier, make their jobs easier to do, and give them a better quality of life, it can have a really big impact on us.
Great. What do you think, and each of you come from a slightly different background, so I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about this. What do you think, as companies who are here obviously think this idea is important, using technology, creating an engaged culture. What do you think the biggest hurdle or biggest challenge to doing that actually is?
I think people knowing the systems. How many of us have systems that we use and you know like just enough to use it, right? But they often have these pretty deep capabilities, a lot of analytics on the back end, I find especially. I think a lot of companies are drowning in data, right? You talk to these platforms, they're like, oh, we can give you all this data. And you're like, great, I do not have time to figure this out. And so as much as technology enables us to do more and be more efficient, I don't think companies and individuals pay enough attention to being able to extract the real learnings and the insights to truly make a powerful difference.
Well,
An email.
I know, right?
Just do
So
what
there's
you
an
do.
overwhelm factor. How do you think, what's the best way for people, and I saw a lot of nodding heads, so what's the best way for people to make use of all of that data
Yeah.
and not feel as overwhelmed by it?
I think companies actually need to consider that as a piece of business success. I was talking with Genentech a little bit ago, and we had their whole HR team in, and we were talking about engagement and culture, and they do some really amazing stuff. And one of the people who introduced himself said, I'm a data scientist. And I was like, we have data scientists at our company, but they're primarily on the engineer side. And so afterwards I asked him, I said, so what is your role exactly? And he said, oh, well, I'm actually one of 3 data scientists on the HR team. And so their role and what they're doing as a global company is realizing exactly this. We have all this data, but how do we really mine for insights? So for them, it was how do we turn that into insights to improve our culture and improve our training programs. So I think as we move forward as businesses, it's not just technology to make us more efficient. It's making sure we're also building in the resources to truly make the most that we can of that.
I think that's so important, and one of the key things that I found with building successful people functions in companies is that people do not realize that you need to hire a tech person in the people team earlier.
Yeah.
Like, most very large companies have tech people in a people function, but really when you're like around 150 people large as a company, you don't really think about having a person with tech skills in your people function, but it's so valuable, and I always do. It's always one of those key hires that is on my list, and that's to do with that, right? What you just described, right? Otherwise, you have like a people function that just buys all these tools, and it's like this massive bunch of just tools that is being used throughout your organization. You have to tie it together. You have to have a person that thinks through those things. So, you know, one thing, if you're an organization 150 people large and you have an HR team, you don't have someone who is at least very good in IT, if not can code a little bit, it's something to start thinking about, because that is definitely a people team of the future.
Agreed.
Right. I'm very curious what you have to say, because you're a much smaller company. What do you think the biggest hurdle is?
Yeah, I'll wear the hat of the small company, growth company here. I think for us, again, it's really, the focus with technology is trying to make people's lives easier. And so we're constantly evaluating our processes to see where can we remove clicks, where can we remove the physical touching of things, so that things can be a little more automated and can basically, I'd say ultimately, the highest value of each one of our staff people is them. It's their brain. It's not them doing administrative heavy work or clicking on boxes and hitting submit and getting caught up in nuanced softwares that they have to learn. What you really want them to do is be able to move as quickly and as efficiently through those processes so they can really get to their core value, which is their talent, and free them up to do what they do as people. And so I think for us, the technology is a tool to free our people up to basically be who they are and bring the most talent to the organization.
Mm-hmm. Do you have I'm really curious about that. Do you have a specific example that comes to mind, or a story that comes to mind around that?
Yeah, so as a small company, we've quickly went from 5 to 10 to 20 to 40 now people. And how many people here use Slack inside your organizations? Okay. So when we go back further, 5-7 years ago, we primarily used email and maybe like an iChat. of some kind to communicate internally. And then as we grew, it got harder, and there inevitably was more shoulder tapping and disruptions among people. We're a quasi-open plan where it's kind of open but siloed among teams. And so we had to be very intentional about setting up disciplines within our teams as far as how we're going to communicate internally. And so we're constantly working on avoiding the shoulder tapping, avoiding the eye chatting, avoiding CCing 10 people on an email, and really get people to be laser focused on their communications. And Slack has been really helpful for that. And initially, as I have some insights to the analytics on the back, I was initially alarmed because I saw such a high use from certain users. There's some people that use it less frequently than others, but I found some people who are using it to send, let's say, 300 messages in a day on Slack. And as the CEO, I'm like, oh my God, they're just constantly on Slack. How can they get anything done? And then as I look closer, I realized that the 3 or 4 people who were in that 100 to 300 messages per day on Slack were my highest performing people on my teams. They're the highest revenue per person people on my teams. And at that point, I had this light bulb go off that said, wait a minute, this is working. Like, they're actually getting stuff done. And when I talked to them about it, I had that confirmed. They're basically getting so much done with interactions through Slack, and they don't have Slack on all the time. They're turning it off and having prolonged periods of work time where they're focused, and they'll turn it back on, and they'll get a lot of stuff done. And it's been a huge help as a tool. Now, from a human systems and culture standpoint, I wouldn't look to Slack as being a huge help. I mean, there's some emoticons and GIFs that are constantly shared, which I think bring out the personality of people. There's channels where there's a lunch channel where people share if they're going to make a lunch run, or we have a basketball hoop out back if somebody wants to play basketball. It's nice to avoid some of the distractions within the office where you can just say, hey, I'm going to go out and shoot hoops. Who else wants to go? So that's nice. But really, our company rhythms have helped us get more focused and efficient when it comes from a alignment and communication standpoint. And in that we have the daily huddle scrum routine. Anybody out here doing a daily huddle scrum with your staff? Okay. So it's we do it, we work basically a 9 to 5:30 day, if you will, and at 9:33, which is, for us, it's important to have it in odd time because everybody remembers. What's your time? 9:24, there you go. It's a best practice, I love it. And every team within the organization has a huddle that ideally lasts no more than 10 minutes, where you have about 5 things. Ours are very specific to what we do, but where we just rattle off 5 things, like what are you working on today? What do you have any challenges or stucks? We also share, basically everybody internally shares a temperature. So you might say you're 80 degrees or 100 degrees or 90 degrees, and very quickly, just by saying basically 2 words, everyone on your team instantly knows like where you're at to start the day, your demeanor. We also, the second thing we share in our daily huddles is a gratitude. It could be personal, it could be work related, but we share something that we're thankful for. And that gets everybody firing psychologically on the positives, gets everybody starting their day on the right things, and it's had a real big impact on us as a culture, as a team, ever since we started the gratitude. So just a few helpful tips.
That's fantastic. I'd love to hear some stories from you guys too. I mean,
Yeah, I would give an example. How many people out here, when they're done, are going to do an expense report? Have to travel. How much time do you spend on expense reports? You have to do that. That's, there's a lot of things that we do. You were talking about administrative processes.
Yeah.
When you're having to sign up a vendor and have to approve invoices, do your expense reports, that can take up a lot of time. And so the more the technology can ease some of those inefficiencies and get you back to work, I think that's where it becomes really valuable, right? When it becomes technology for the sake of technology's sake, but when it can really empower and enrich those relationships that you have, enrich your learning and your ability to execute and be efficient, right? That's where it matters.
do you have a specific example or story about something?
Yeah, I've worked for a company in the past, I won't name names, where security was a really big issue. And so, for example, example, we couldn't put a jump drive into the computer in order to switch a file. And so we were at a place where we had to have agencies email stuff to other agencies because we couldn't have it. And it just created a lot of inefficiencies. And so it's important for companies to not just try to stay where they need to be, but to think ahead and to understand what technologies are coming out, talk to other companies, talk to other leaders to understand what are they doing to stay ahead, what's coming around the corner, and how do you stay ahead of that?
Fantastic. All right, what about you?
I think I love it, like making just lives easier, right, and making it more fluid. One of the first things I do besides just restructuring the people team somewhat, is implementing an internal help desk, internal service desk. We call it the people team service desk, and people can make requests a lot faster. For example, we advise people to do once a year a team strategy offsite, right? Now, if you ask managers to do so, they have to organize an event, like they have to organize a venue for it, they have to organize lunch, all of that stuff. Instead, at Grovo and previous companies I worked for, they just go onto the people team service desk and they add in a date and the number of team members, and my team takes care of the rest. It just makes lives a lot easier. And it's interesting, right? Because we use help desks, like a Zendesk and stuff like that, for external communication with customers all the time. But we don't think to do that internally. Like, my customers are the people that work at the company. And it's not expensive. We just, we put the add-on on top of Jira, which is probably a tool that is being used by your engineers anyway. It's simple to use, simple to set up, and you create a streamlined process that way. So one thing as well that when Brian was talking about a quick temperature check, one little fun tool that we implemented that I developed with a colleague of mine back in the days when I was at Atlassian, and we're still using it here in this company, is what we call a mood app. It's an iPad app that we put at the exits of all our buildings globally. And we just had one question displayed on it. For example, did you feel stressed today? Or do you like lunch? Or what do you think of the strategy documentation that is provided to you? And we had, smiley faces from very unhappy to smiley faces, or, we also had a scale from rock on to, I will not show that sign, but it was really easy. As people exited the building, at the end of the day, they just would simply press. And even if they didn't want to press, they were often curious what their colleagues were about to say. So we made sure that once they pressed, the results were displayed instantly as well. And we started to track moods over time. So we could really see across the offices what the temperature gauge was. Very similar to what you do verbally, we implemented a technology solution. We actually open sourced it. It's called Mood App. You can download it. It's easy. You just have to buy your own iPad, plunk it at the exits of your building, and you can access it. But it's, a little tiny tool like that makes a massive difference.
That's fantastic. I'm curious to know if you guys use an internal wiki. I've seen that as a trend and a tool with a lot of companies where there's a continually developing internal wiki for a repository, if you will, for company information. Do you guys use that, and have you found that to be effective?
Yeah, we literally have an internal wiki, which people mostly hate, but our CEO is an engineer, and so as an engineering company, that sort of was the easiest thing years back. And instead of going to an intranet, which is going to take time and money, we've just always used the wiki and kind of default to that. And we do that because we have Slack, and there's other ways that we can much more efficiently just send information around. What I'm seeing more and more, though, is companies kind of jumping over the intranet and just moving straight past it to an app, where you have the information right here. You can access anyone in the company. You have their numbers. It's helpful if someone's on the road. Also can be a really efficient way for companies to communicate the information. So it's not just this other place you have to go for more information, and really have it be like a self-service tool where you're as informed as you have time to be. Now the information can come to you in a way that's really organic. You can see it whenever you have a moment to look. We look at our phones all day long, so the information is there. I find that the more that a company can bring the information to you as the employee, the more effective it is.
Do you have an example? Are there apps? I'm assuming not all apps have to be built from the ground up, that they're apps that you can go out and use to create such a thing?
There are. All the ones that I've used, we've built from the ground up.
Oh, okay.
But more and more, I think even internet companies have a capability. And I think, again, this is where you have to stay really fluid. Gmail has a couple pretty interesting things. You can use G-Sites. Those are pretty accessible if you use Google across the company, which I think companies are starting to do. I don't know if you guys have better examples that you
Well, there's a Chrome app. I actually do not know the name of it, but there's a Chrome app, and that can be implemented by your IT administrator as they set up new computers. And you just click, in your Chrome browser, you click the app, and you see all the links, like you were saying, like
Okta?
No, it's not Okta. No, it's the single sign-on thing. But so I actually do not know the name, unfortunately. Sorry, people. I feel embarrassed now.
Don't.
We do use Confluence as well as a company wiki. We use it as a team a lot to put all our information, our policies, company information, procedures, and all of that stuff we put on our wiki. But the people in the organization rarely access it. They only access it through the Service Desk portal, which serves as a knowledge base. So as people, there's a big ask any question bar in it. People start typing, for example, parental leave, and the policy pops up. So it's like a continuous knowledge base that is being served. The additional advantage there is if people have a request, for example, I need to mail something, they don't necessarily have to submit a request to my team. We want to avoid people submitting too many requests to our team. So they start typing in, I want to post something, and immediately the knowledge base article will pop up as well, which is easy. Again, treat your own internal organization like your external customers, and you'll see that you put in place better technology to serve your internal team, which is really, really valuable.
Yeah, we don't have an app that we use. I'm interested. I took some notes to see what I could add. Our payroll provider has basically a wiki kind of equivalent where we can upload important documents and policies and forms and things that you need. And the reason we ended up doing it through our payroll apps, you can also set up all of your withholding information. You can administer your 401k and all that stuff in one place. So that's why we did it, because it was easy for us. But I'm interested in checking out some other apps that might be better. I will say, again, kind of zigging to the zag of the technology piece, we lean a lot on our human systems to be that resource. And what I mean by that is we have a rhythm of opportunities where people know they can have conversations. For instance, every Friday from 4 to 5:30, I post up in our lounge area and just make myself available. I'll sit there and hang out and let people know that's my free time to come and chat with me, talk with me, ask me anything. I try to make myself available. I'm there most of the time. I know people have given feedback that they like that. We also have every quarter, so we have a lot of rhythms, a weekly rhythm, a daily rhythm, talked about the Scrum. We also have every quarter, every team has a half-day offsite, where they go offsite and they just work, they have homework and readings they do ahead of time. They come together, and a big part of that quarterly offsite, half-day offsite for each team, is to create space to have critical conversations. If you have some challenges you want to work through, if you have some questions, if you want to talk about pay and compensation and benefits, the point is they know that once a quarter they're going to have an opportunity to talk internally as a team with their supervisor in a safe forum to have those conversations. We also have quarterly, bi-monthly one-on-ones with your team lead, where again, if something's going on, you know you have that coming, where you can save some topics and conversations and have those. We also have a quarterly all-team offsite. It's a full day offsite for the whole company. We go offsite and we basically we were talking about this earlier. We do a look back to the previous quarter and talk about what we accomplished, what's worth celebrating. We also do a look forward to see what we're going to be focused on the next quarter, so we can make sure we're all aligned on our objectives. We all know what the most important thing is, and we're all marching toward that same mountain peak with the same North Star. I also set up a time during that where, as homework going into it, everybody talks about one thing they would start, one thing they would stop, one thing that they would like to continue. Company-wide, everybody does that. So all of that feedback and all of that research from a survey standpoint comes in. Everybody on the leadership team spends time talking about it and looking into it and digging into it. We look for quick fixes, things we can do really quick and easy. You'd be surprised the things that people want you to start, stop, or continue, that you could just basically wave your hand and make it happen. And then we talk about the harder things, the more challenging things, or the things that you want to put more thought into. And we as a leadership team look through all of that, and then we come into the all-company quarterly alignment meeting, and we talk about those things so that it's really important so everybody knows that their concerns, that their needs, that their ideas are being heard, they're being talked about, and then we're working toward real solutions with those. And I think technology can play a real critical piece in that, and it sounds like you've talked about some ways of doing that, but there's also this human piece where people, I think many times, just want to be heard. They want to be acknowledged. They want to know that the people at the top and in the middle and all the way from the bottom to the top are aware of what they want and what they're thinking and what their ideas are. And so as much as the technology can be a helpful tool, the human aspect, the real face-to-face, in-flesh piece is really important for us.
Well,
go ahead. I was just going to say, I love that you're hitting on is that you can't rely on technology to create or stand in for a culture that doesn't exist, right? That it can promote the culture that you have, it can help facilitate it, help reinforce it, but to rely too much on those tools for communication, to rely too much on those tools for professional development, it can really fall flat if it doesn't live alive in your organization. I think of especially like training, right? There's like modules you have to click through and they're like old and dated, versus being able to sit in a classroom, raise your hand, ask questions, communicate with and build relationships with the people sitting next to you. I think that's really important.
Well, to your point,
I love that.
talking can oftentimes be so much more efficient than sending emails back and forth. It's really hard to have a conversation. That's good. It's really hard to have a conversation, especially where there might be disagreements or misalignment or conflict via email or even on Slack or any other technology. I mean, it can happen so much faster. You can read someone's emotions and you can get to the bottom of it just by talking. And so carving out time, I hate the whole shoulder tapping. There's a huge risk of that in today's kind of open office sort of say anything you want, ask anything you want culture. So I think carving out appropriate times and systems and places to have those critical face-to-face conversations can be really efficient.
Yeah, we actually sometimes scale back the technology if necessary. I remember when we introduced a recognition program, our organization became too big and we wanted to encourage people to recognize each other for a great job, right? So we put online a system for you to recognize anyone in the organization, to thank them if they helped you or if they had achieved something great. So you could nominate someone and then you could select a certain gift that we had. And it just didn't really take off. It felt impersonal.
Yeah.
So we started to introduce the human element combined with the technology in there. So I could, if I think that Johnny Johnson has done something great, I could nominate Johnny, and I could, instead of selecting a gift from a certain list, I could select my own gift that I felt Johnny would really want, to a certain budget, obviously. And then my team would buy the gift and would bring me a little card that I could write a handwritten note on, and the gift would come back, and I will put it on the person's desk. Yes, we made it easy to recognize each other through technology, but we didn't just automate it because it just didn't feel human. And then once we started doing that, the program took off. So having the right levels is so important.
I love this conversation because I agree with all of you. I don't think you can possibly underestimate the power and the value of actual human-to-human connection. And I laughed when you said about conversations in text. Lately, I have found myself, it's the third back and forth in a text conversation, and I'm like, I'm just going to make a phone call because it's just faster. It's just faster.
The challenge is oftentimes people don't want to answer the phone.
Right. Right.
I think we live in a culture where people have phone call aversion. They'd much rather have a conversation on by text or by anything else than actually having a real conversation. That's a whole can of worms.
And we have to help people figure out how to do that, because I think there's a whole generation that's going to be more challenged actually having face-to-face conversations because they just haven't grown up
One
doing
thing
that.
I was thinking about as we were talking about having this panel is we have all this technology in our lives, and it's supposed to make our lives easier. In a lot of ways, some ways it has, right? But it also has, I think, kind of destroyed these boundaries that we have with each other, with work, personal lives. And I think it's really critical that as we evaluate for effectiveness and productivity, that we don't underestimate the value of wisdom for our own lives, creating boundaries for ourselves and for organizations that say, here's when I check, here's when I don't. Have agreements on your team of when you need to answer emails, how early or how late. That's something we're starting to do within our own team because we were getting in this habit of everyone working really late, and then the later someone works, the later they're sending an email, and then the later you need to respond to it. And so really kind of stepping back and saying, all right, what are our ground rules around this stuff? How do we protect our own lives and our own
I love that.
relationships outside of work in order that we can be more effective at work?
I love that.
Setting boundaries.
Yeah, setting
That's-
boundaries with technology.
One thing that, from a boundary perspective, has nothing to do with technology. Maybe a little bit. We had unlimited holidays, or we still have unlimited holidays. Most companies these days, like a lot of tech companies, do this. And we had to introduce the rule that people had to take a minimum of 3 leave days per quarter. And we mandated that. We basically provide managers with data showing them how much leave their people have taken, because we have to proactively provide protection for the people, like you do with the email. Now, the only thing where it's connected to technology is, I guess, we have systems to track how much leave people take and encourage people to take more instead of less.
Well, and I think what I love about the direction this conversation's taken is it's really about how does technology come up under the human element. It's not the technology becomes the culture. Like you said, you can't put technology on top of something to create a culture that doesn't exist. And that culture is created by people. At the end of the day, it's created by people. I know people have some questions. I have one quick question about takeaways, because I want everybody in the audience to walk out of here with some concrete ideas. And so just very quickly, if you can, if each of you would share just 1 or 2 executable ideas or actions that folks can take when they leave here or when they get home to really start building out this idea in their own company.
Yeah, I'll share, and I want to piggyback on this previous conversation because I think it was really, really important what y'all said. The best and worst part of technologies that really becomes a helpful tool in our organizations is people are really able to get more done, more work done, more accomplished, more wins than was ever possible, 2, 5, 10 years ago. It's incredible the rate of productivity your people can have if you have a healthy, thriving organization where they've got the right tools to get stuff done. The challenging side of that is people are working really hard and they're getting a lot of stuff done. And I think it's really important that we make sure we're caring for our people and that they're not just working and working and working, because it's kind of addictive to have technology that allows you to get a lot done. It's really rewarding. And so at my company, caring for people comes first. And I found that the more that we're able to care for people with mandatory time off, which we have as well, with unlimited paid time off, which is I think what you were talking about, and making sure people actually aren't working late. People are working, late into the evening on a regular basis, it's a problem. We'll have a conversation about it. If people are working on weekends and evenings and you can see the activity on Slack or on email or wherever, we're going to have a critical conversation about it because we need you to be well. We need you to be well rested, well cared for. And it's not to mean we're so important that we can control people's lives and decide if they're having happy, healthy lives or not. But we do have a big impact and a big influence on people's lives. And so we're constantly working to protect our people, to make sure that they are best positioned to be healthy and cared for. And what I found is that when we're doing that, doing it well, we get the highest productivity from them from 9 to 5 when they're supposed to be working than we've ever had in the past. We've got this really unusual anomaly. I think it's mostly good. I'm still working on it in my own head, where in our 7.5 years of being a company, nobody has ever quit, nobody's ever resigned, no one's ever left.
Wow.
And it's, yeah, and like I said, I think it's mostly good. I'm certainly not here to say turnover is all bad, but I think the reason that it's worked so well is that very sincere, genuine care and making sure that while the technology, they're supported with technology that makes their lives easier and better and supports them to do the best work they can do, we also want to protect them as people and make sure that they're really being cared for in every other possible way it can be. And so you asked for a quick tip. One quick tip I'll give you is whenever somebody is sick, like they're home, they're sick, they called in sick, they let someone know. We have a system, you know, all these food delivery systems like Caviar and there's some other ones. When they're home sick, our human resources, our people services sends them a link to basically order a lunch to be delivered. You know, some chicken noodle soup or whatever they want to order, can have it delivered. And that's our way of showing like, hey, we care about you. Even when you're sick, we want to make sure you're well cared for. So just one small quick
That's
tip.
great.
I think making people take paid time off days. We have a quarterly creative day where once a quarter, every staff person has to take one day with the intention of refilling their creative cup because we're a creative company. And what that means is, I don't really care what you do. You could have a movie marathon on the couch. You could go for a hike in the park. You could do yoga all day or whatever you want to do. But basically do something that promotes restoring your creativity. And you have to tell us what you're going to do ahead of time, so there's some intention and some accountability. And then when you come back from that day, within a week, you need to share a paragraph and maybe an artifact of what you did, which again, going back to that psychology of gratitudes, can share with people what you've done, which I think just kind of boosts everybody's morale, everybody's kind of warm feelings and getting all the feels out. So
That's fantastic. Quick tips from the two of you?
Yeah, so I was just thinking, some of the stuff you said, a lot of times I talk to companies about culture and especially executives or executive teams feel like, it's kind of the soft stuff, like it's nice to have, but the reality is that it drives business. And nothing gets done if it doesn't drive a bottom line, which is probably why you do it.
yeah, definitely.
One of the things we looked at was every year we have our best places to work list, and so we have a chief economist who took a look at all the companies who've been on the list for the last 8 years, and looked at their portfolios for the public companies to see how it would perform against the S&P if you had invested in the S&P 500. And we looked at the portfolios a couple ways, and what we found is that companies who are highest rated by their employees significantly outperform the S&P 500 by an average of 122%. And for the companies who are lowest performing, they underperformed by 30%. Right? So when we talk about things like how to drive productivity, caring about your employees, allowing them to have this kind of restorative place outside of work or even inside work is critical to business success. So the two things I would offer, and I feel like we're in some ways kind of challenging the whole concept of this panel around technology, is understand what boundaries you need to create for yourself and for your teams. And it could be your small team, it could be the larger team, but where do people need to protect that time and having agreements with each other for how you're going to protect that? You can use technology to protect that. You can put your emails in draft so they only get sent starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if your time and where you're productive is to work at night, great. You want to allow people to do that. But how do you make sure that that's not creating this kind of spin that is exhausting for people? And then the second thing is figure out where the inefficiencies are and what isn't working, and then evaluate how technology can support that. Instead of kind of looking at technology first and then how you're going to absorb all that and use this to be efficient, really understanding the rhythms, the processes of your company and of your team, and take a little bit of time to understand, get some data around that, and then evaluate the right platforms that you can use. And there's plenty of smaller, you don't have to go big with huge investments, but really look for ways that you can drive for the ways that are right for your company and your needs.
Cool.
That's good.
Great.
Quickly, so I think if you're scaling to 300, 400 people, definitely hire a HR tech person in your team. I think having an internal service desk is a really good investment of time. It's easy to do, and it will make your team so much better and more professional. And then tack to that, one thing people can organize through Service Desk is fun things to do every quarter. We encourage teams to, take their team out bowling or go for drinks or whatever it is. One thing that really has helped us a lot is giving every manager a prepaid credit card, because people hate having to reimburse money, and then we have to think about budget and all of that stuff. So if we have a budget for every single team member on your team, we can preload, and we can automatically do that through software, preload a credit card. Every manager has a credit card, and they can spend that money every quarter, and they can spend it on whatever they want to do. And if they want to do something fun, they want to organize a bowling event or something like that, then they can organize that through Service Desk, and my team will help them organize it. But they have their own card. There's a few services available now where you can have these preloaded credit cards. It's really easy to implement. It will make your finance department very happy as well, because there's an aspect of control as well. But it gives people power themselves to do things for their team that they would like to do. So that will be one little takeaway.
Fantastic. We have time for just a couple of questions from the audience.
Hello. I'm wondering if any one of you is using coaching, and I'm not talking about executive coaching. I'm talking about training managers to be coaches, so actually have coaches for all employees with an open door and questions.
You mean internal coaches?
It could be internal or hired external coach. So basically someone who can help employees with prioritizing. These are all good tips, right? Like push away things that are not important, but having a professional coach, someone else than your manager.
We do for our leadership team. If I, just to be frank, if I could afford it for everybody in the company, I would get it for everybody in the company. I think it's a super valuable tool.
Yeah, we actually have someone who's kind of quasi on staff, but one of the things that we do at Glassdoor, because we're a very transparent company, so we're transparent inside, which means there's a lot of feedback. So we do a pretty in-depth emotional intelligence training for all teams, and the way that shows up for a team is that you have a couple days where you sit kind of intensive in a room, you learn about emotional intelligence, and then we also have a time where we give feedback. The way that shows up for managers is that they both learn how to give feedback in a really good way and then also receive it. And it's amazing how just building that muscle of human communication can really help develop a team. And so that's where we've focused on it. We're getting more sophisticated about actual manager training programs. We've recently introduced Glint. So we have kind of our big takeaways from Glassdoor and our scores there, but then using Glint to kind of get under it with each of the managers to understand what's going on in their organizations, and then working with them very specifically to train against some of the things that are going on kind of specifically in their teams, which I think can be more effective than kind of this broad training, right? But to help managers get more specifically trained in what they need to do to drive their teams.
Yeah, very quickly, if we were all Facebook, we would all have enough money to have coaches for everyone, which is what they do, and it's bloody amazing. We don't. We do use tools like Glint. We use a tool called Culture, really good tool. Instead of doing performance reviews, our first performance review was really a survey which provided bottom-up review data where managers get reviewed by their direct reports. What I do find though with training is if we provide, what is great about coaching is that it's both timely and it's relevant, right? And we need to find a way, and again through technology we can do that, to make training more timely. For example, it's crazy that our managers have to wait for half a year until the next face-to-face training session takes place, because by that time, most people have already acquired bad habits and they've already had to go through a bunch of challenges. So through a tool like Grovo, training is provided at a time of need. So if a person becomes a manager, for example, training is automatically assigned to them, which is much better because it's at a time of need, which is what coaching is not coaching is able to do, but other training is not capable of doing. But yeah, it's a great question.
Fantastic. All right, one more question, and then I'm already over time. They're going to be mad at me.
This question is to any of you. What is your advice for technical co-founders communicating with non-technical co-founders in a project management sense?
So how to speak the same language?
Yeah, so non-technical co-founders
I was in a meeting a little while ago with a technical team, and we were working on this project, and there was the project manager there. And I realized I would say something, and they would kind of look at me, and then he would say, so what we need to do is blah, blah, blah. And I'd go, oh, yeah. And then they would say something back, and I'd be like, And then he would be like, so what you need to do is, I'd be like, oh, yeah. So at a very basic level, you might have someone in the room who can speak both languages
An
to
interpreter.
help facilitate that. I'm serious, though. But I do think that that's a real challenge in a lot of organizations is how do we do not just technical, non-technical, but people who speak in kind of different languages and have different needs. So yeah, have a facilitator. I think having the wisdom to say, help me understand how to say this. Is this answering your question? How can I, how do I best communicate this with you, and to ask those questions? But that's a challenge, and it takes time and wisdom and open conversation, I think.
Yeah, my quick answer is essentially the same. We have for our development team, we have a product owner that is the translator. So they're out in the other teams of the company gathering stories and getting the insights and feedback, and then bringing it back. So it's essentially a mediator or a translator role. So on a technical team like a development team or a software team, typically it's a product owner. But ideally, you would have a role like that could be an intermediary.
I think business teams can learn a lot from development teams in terms of how they communicate. And I actually think like using some of the way information is structured, and working through stories and having a more agile methodology in place. I actually think I learned a lot from all my, most of my bosses were technical founders, right? And the way they structured information within their development teams was actually very similar to, what we took over as a business as well. I think it was really, really valuable. So in terms of, generally speaking, a co-founder also is business savvy and is therefore capable of communicating something quite well. Yeah. And I think that a lot of technical leaders are actually very good in delivering a message. So I never really had that problem as such.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool. Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time and attention this afternoon. Thank you, wonderful panelists.